Welcome back to Savannah Car and Truck Accident Law with Andy Conn. I'm Brooke, and today I'm here with Andy Conn from Conn Law Firm. Good to see you, Andy. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke.
Today, we're getting into something that can make or break a car accident case in Savannah, the evidence. So most people think of the police report as just paperwork, but the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety tracks more than 6 million police-reported crashes a year nationally. And here in Chatham County, the quality of that report and the evidence backing it up often decides whether someone gets fair compensation through the Chatham County State Court or walks away with nothing. We're going to break down every type of evidence that matters, from the GA Form 523 police report filed by the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department or the Georgia State Patrol, to photos, witness statements, video footage, medical records, expert testimony, and how it all comes together in the Georgia courtroom. So, most people never read a police accident report until they are the ones that are in the crash. To start this episode, why is the police accident report often one of the most important documents in a car accident claim here in Savannah?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's like with most things in the law, it's on a case-by-case basis on how important it may or may not be. Certainly at the early portion of the claim or the case, when you're working with an insurance company, it's very important because insurance adjusters often don't do a thorough investigation. They just rely on whatever's in that police report. And so while oftentimes police reports are wrong or have inaccurate information, that's probably what you're going to be working off of early on when trying to negotiate a claim before filing a lawsuit. Now, once you're actually in the litigation in a matter, if you have to get to that point and you're going to trial, much of what is in the police report is inadmissible. There are some aspects that are admissible, things that the officer may have observed after the fact or witness statements. Those can be admissible. But usually if an officer decides that somebody is or is not at fault, that does not come into evidence. But it is something, like I mentioned, very important to insurance adjusters in determining fault and whether they're going to fully compensate someone without filing a lawsuit or not. So they can be very important, especially early on in the case.
When it comes to like preservation of the facts, what would you have to say in regards to that?
Yeah, it's so incredibly important. You know, once you hire an attorney, they're going to, hopefully, if they're a good attorney, do a thorough investigation, but they're not there at the scene with you. They can't gather a lot of the evidence that's only really there in, a snapshot in time. And so if you're in an accident in Georgia or in Chatham County somewhere, absolutely document everything about the scene. Document the damage to any vehicles, document the witnesses. That's so super important to get witnesses, get their information. The police don't always, believe it or not, get that information, even when there are witnesses who have things to say about the scene. But take videos. And if someone is talking, absolutely, if you can, record what they're saying. And you can just say, hey, I'm doing this for my own memory, but document everything you possibly can, because sometimes a lawyer or the experts that we hire are only as good as the evidence that comes, from that snapshot in time at the scene of an accident.
So the GA Form 523 is more than a one-page summary. It's a structured form with about 30 different fields. What information is typically included in the Savannah Police Accident Report that can affect a compensation claim?
Yeah, so the Form 523, we normally just call that a Georgia Motor Vehicle Crash Report. That's the less formal way of putting it. We don't often refer to them as their formal numbers, but they vary. You might have a very experienced police officer who's filling out that form, who's dotting every I and crossing every T. You might have a police officer who's less experienced or maybe is in a rush that doesn't get all of the information in there. But it can include, if it's really thorough, it can include, a wealth of information. It can include the weather conditions. It can include the witnesses and statements by witnesses. It can include what you when you get in an accident, say at the scene of the accident. And so it's really important to be, careful with what you're telling police officers. It can include, oftentimes, like we mentioned, whether the police cites someone with a ticket for being at fault for the wreck or someone else. But yeah, it has, like you mentioned, 30 or 50 things that can be included. One of my biggest frustrations is when I get one of those 30 or 50 things, there's only a couple of them filled out. And so again, really important that you don't just rely on the police for an investigation. Do your own documenting.
Yeah, I'm just curious, are there any sort of like diagrams or anything like that are on these forms that are filled out at the scene?
Yeah, that's one thing that is, for me personally, really helpful. And one thing they oftentimes actually do a really good job of, they'll have a diagram below some of that information that shows sort of if you're at an intersection, the two cross streets, it'll show what the reported direction of each vehicle was going and in sort of how the crash happened in a picture diagram. So that is often helpful to sort of orient yourself with, what the roadway looks like where the collision happened.
That's great. I love that they do that. The police officer gets to go back to art class and draw the diagram, but it's helpful for you guys. So most claimants lose control of their case here without even realizing it. How do insurance companies use Savannah police reports when evaluating Georgia car accident claims?
Yeah, like I mentioned, your average insurance adjuster, depending on which type of case it is, they're not going to have the credentials of a lawyer. They're not going to have sort of the background to be able to fully investigate things. So they heavily rely on these accident reports. And so again, what is said and what information goes into that accident report means a lot when you're negotiating a claim prior to filing a lawsuit. Now, as I mentioned before, that's not always the way things work when you're actually trying a case. And in fact, the way that insurance adjusters evaluate cases often are not how jurors think and how evidence is presented at trial. But it's definitely important early on in the case and the early parts of the claim for what you might be able to settle your case for.
People argue about this constantly, especially when the officer arrived after the fact, but can a police officer's opinion about who was at fault actually influence a car accident lawsuit here in Chatham County?
Yeah, well, again, it can influence it on the early portion, what an insurance adjuster might give you credit for. But no, at trial, if an officer did not actually witness the wreck, which almost never do they actually witness the wreck itself, then they can't usually give an opinion on who caused the wreck. Now, what they can do is say what their observations were. If they saw tire marks, they might measure those tire marks, and that might give them an indication of what might have happened. If they spoke to witnesses or if they spoke to you yourself at the scene, then they can come to trial and talk about what you might have said to them as part of their determination on what they were doing in their investigation. But typically the ultimate issue of whether they can actually say who was at fault or not, that usually does not come into evidence at trial.
Okay, that's good. Is the officer's, observations at the scene, is that something that's highly persuasive?
It can be. It certainly can be, especially when it comes to eyewitness accounts. If the officer says that you said you were fine and you weren't hurt, then the defense attorneys and the insurance companies are going to use that to say that you couldn't have possibly been injured in the wreck. Even though we know good and well that when you get in a wreck, your adrenaline's flowing, you don't even know if you're seriously injured. I have clients all the time who clearly are objectively hurt from a car wreck, but due to their adrenaline, all they're worried about is checking on the other driver to make sure they're okay, because they're trying to be a human being, which is a good thing. But at the end of the day, when you do say something like that, like you hear on TV, it can be used against you in the court of law.
I'm sure the adrenaline, when you go through something like that, makes you do and say crazy things. So this is good advice here. Well, we've covered why the police report matters so much here in Savannah, what is in it, how insurance companies use it, and what the officer's fault opinion really means under Georgia law. So now let's talk about the evidence that the client controls: the photos, the witnesses, the video, the medical records, the places that can make a weak report strong or a strong report unbeatable. So the officer is human, working a chaotic scene, sometimes in the rain, on Truman Parkway at midnight. What should drivers do if they notice an error in the Savannah police accident report?
That's a great question. Typically, you're not going to have the accident report the instant that it's happening. It's usually not available for a couple of days later. But if you do notice that there's an error, officers are humans, and we recognize that they make mistakes, and that's okay. I think they even understand in a situation where it's rainy and it's midnight that they're gonna make some mistakes sometimes. But give them a call. You should call the police officer. Once the accident report is available, their information will be available to you. And just call them and say, hey, you put this here, but I think you'll recall it actually happened this way. And what I found is most of the time they're reasonable and they understand that, oh yeah, you know what? I do remember it that way. I'm sorry. And they'll change it for you. But also hire a good attorney who's going to help you evaluate that as well, because there might be things that you and your attorney talk about what happened, but you might not know some subtle detail from the accident report because it's given a numerical number that you don't even recognize whether that means the windshield wipers were on or the windshield wipers were off, or was it wet or dry. And sometimes these things are just honest mistakes that can very easily be fixed if you reach out to the police officer as quickly as possible while it's still fresh on their mind.
Yeah, when it comes to the process of getting those errors corrected, is there, I guess, any official process that the officer and yourself have to go through to kind of make sure that those get corrected?
The short answer is I wish there was a more formal process. Oftentimes it's calling again to get the police officers to talk to you about a particular instance. I have a case that we just got this client recently, and it's not an issue with the officer making a mistake, but there was a tractor trailer that hit my client on US 80 and fled from the scene. And we're trying to track down who this tractor trailer driver is. We're fully investigating this. We've been able to get some video footage from gas stations and a liquor store and other nearby businesses. But ultimately, the police have access to a lot of information that we don't until we file a lawsuit. They have the ability to go get things. And so we're calling this police officer every day to try to get more information and trying to give him information that we've received to help them finalize their investigation to find this person who fled from the scene. I'll tell you, in this particular instance, we're having some trouble because sometimes the police officers don't call you back right away. But stay vigilant and stay on top of them. Again, they're busy people. They're human beings. We want to give them some grace. But we also, we want to stay on top of things and make sure that they're fully investigating and doing their job.
Absolutely. When it comes to correcting any changes, I suppose, what sort of things are important that you bring to be able to prove that error?
I had a case. This was last year. It actually happened on the border of Georgia and Alabama. I handle cases sort of all over, Georgia and even in neighboring states oftentimes. But this was an example where the officers, they didn't list my client as at fault, but they just said that they couldn't determine whether it was the other driver or my client who was at fault. And again, initially on this insurance adjuster, they're going to look at that and say, well, sorry, we have nothing to say that our insured was the person who caused this, so we're not going to pay you money. We were able to track down a witness using some forensics, and we reached out to that witness, and what she had to say was basically built the whole case. She saw very specifically that the other driver had run a red light and smashed into my clients. And they had very serious injuries. One person had a brain injury. There's several children in the car. There was one pregnant woman who had a baby the next day. I mean, it was an awful sort of wreck. But I was able to find this witness, get a statement from her, provide that to the police department, and the police department amended their police report to list the other driver as at fault, which again, not so important for trial because that would be inadmissible, but super important because as soon as we had that evidence, the insurance company paid their full policy limits because they knew at that point, it was a serious case that they could see that the other side had screwed up.
So, your phone is in your pocket. The scene is right in front of you, but most people miss the shots that actually matter. How important are photographs from the accident scene when building a compensation case in Chatham County?
They're so incredibly important, and I'll tell you why. There's really a lot of different reasons. Some are going to be obvious. Some are probably less obvious to the average person who hasn't been in a car wreck before or who's not an attorney. The obvious things are take pictures of, where the sort of the property damage that will show, be able to sort of help you forensically show how the wreck happened. Definitely take pictures of all of your injuries, bruises, cuts, broken bones that are visible, anything like that. You want to be taking pictures of that, because that's going to be how you establish what we call damages, what we're asking for compensation down the road. Some of the less obvious things that most people don't think about is take pictures of the roadway. If there are skid marks, we want those pictures. Take pictures from both directions. If it's at an intersection, take video of the lights, because oftentimes the sequencing of the lights is very important, especially if the other driver says, I didn't run the red light. Then sometimes how those lights are turning because lights turn differently from red to green, green to yellow, yellow to red. They change depending on what the intersection is. So taking a video of what that sequencing of the lights looks like allows me as your attorney and allows my experts to reconstruct the scene to be able to decide who is actually at fault. And I'll tell you, I've got a case, another tractor trailer wreck case right now, where that evidence, the sequencing and timing, is going to disprove what the other driver said, because he said he didn't run a red light. But based on what we know forensically from the timing of the traffic signals, this person very clearly did run the red light and very seriously injured my client.
That's really important. It's not something that everybody would think to make sure to grab videos and photos of. So I appreciate you for sharing that. One other question that I had is, I guess, are things like environmental factors important to photograph and video at the scene?
Well, definitely. And that should be, if you're doing all those other things I mentioned, if you're taking videos of the lights, if you're taking pictures of the roadway each way and the cars, then it should be fairly obvious whether it's raining, whether it's dry, all of these different things. But yes, those are really important because, again, the other driver might say it was dry. And then if you can prove that it was raining and wet, and maybe this person, didn't give himself enough room to stop based on the weather elements, that could be something that's the difference between not collecting anything and fully being compensated for your personal injury claims.
Now, you briefly mentioned this when you're talking about one of your other cases, but a neutral third party who saw the crash from the sidewalk or another vehicle can really change the entire direction of a case. So why do witness statements often play a major role in proving liability in Georgia car accident lawsuits?
Yeah, so if it's a he said, she said, right? If, let's say, Brooke, hopefully this doesn't happen. Let's say if you get in a wreck and you very clearly had a green light and somebody came from the opposite direction with a red light, crashed and T-boned and hit you, and you were seriously injured as a result. If you say, well, they ran the red light, and they say, no, you ran the red light, well, that's really hard for a jury to decide, well, who's telling the truth here, right? Because both of them have a vested interest in potentially lying. And so if you have a witness, usually you and the other party kind of balance each other out. But if you have a third party witness who has no dog in the fight, who's not going to be compensated, jurors know that. They know that this person has no reason to lie, especially if it's someone that no one knows at the scene. If you're able to identify someone who's able to support your version of events, you're almost always going to win on the liability side of things. And so that's why, again, police officers all the time forget to list these people in the accident report. So important for you to talk to witnesses at the scene, get their information, ask if it's okay if you can call them afterwards, or if your attorney can call them afterwards, because they could make the difference between winning and losing a case.
Yeah, that's really, really important. And again, when you're going through that trauma of an accident, probably not something that you really think to do or think to ask for, but sounds like it could really make or break a case. So very important.
Yeah.
Cameras are everywhere now. We have dash cams, business surveillance cameras, doorbells, and the Savannah Chatham Metropolitan Police Department body cams. How can video evidence like dash cams or surveillance footage impact accident claims here in Savannah?
Yeah, I mean, in several different ways. I mentioned one earlier, which is sometimes you don't know when somebody flees from the scene, you don't know who that is. And maybe you didn't get a driver's a license plate number. And so understanding where it happened and very quickly, and this is super important, very quickly going to these local businesses who could have captured it on camera is super important. Oftentimes they record over in a 24-hour period or a 7-day window. And so if you don't very quickly reach out to local businesses, they might not still have that video for you. So first of all, it's really important when you're trying to investigate who actually did something. But then if it's someone who did stop, then it, again, just like with a witness, even better than a witness who corroborates your story. If a camera, from a gas station corroborates that the other person ran the red light, well, that's even stronger evidence. And that's only going to bolster your chances of being successful in either resolving your case pre-suit or going to trial. And then third, the body cameras, they're so important. This is such an advantage that we didn't have 15, 20 years ago, which is that, oftentimes you can catch people in lies because they might say one thing under oath in a deposition, but what they told that officer, they might not realize was all caught on camera. If they said something different at the time of the actual events that happened, that's really compelling evidence that they're trying to hide something. And that's really going to bolster your claims as well.
Yeah, those body cameras definitely make a big difference. Like you said, it's a newer advantage that we have in 2026. So the American College of Emergency Physicians recommends that anyone in a motor vehicle crash be evaluated even if they're fine. So what role does medical evidence play in proving injuries in a Chatham County car accident case?
Sure. And this goes back to that point I made earlier, which is adrenaline. Right? You don't even know sometimes you know, like if you got a bone sticking out of your leg, you know that there's an issue going on, right? But oftentimes if you have like a spinal, injury or something in your low back or your shoulders, you don't start to feel that until days later. And so, the importance of at the scene when the EMS is there is to try to really take a deep breath. See how your body really feels. Don't just say the quickest thing because you want to go home and you want to, put this all behind you. They're going to use that against you to say, listen, you said you were fine at the scene. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a case if you say you're fine at the scene and go home. Oftentimes people go to the hospital later that day, or maybe you wake up the next day and you're like, God, I feel like I got hit by a truck, which you actually did get hit by a truck. And so you might feel those effects the next day. The important thing is, as soon as you feel something, you need to seek medical attention. And when you seek medical attention, don't just tell them about the most hurt part of your body, right? If your neck hurts the most, but your back still hurts and your knee still hurts, well, your neck might have a, sort of a shorter term, painful injury, but the back might actually be the thing that was knocked off line that is going to have a longer term effect. And so it's really important that you let your medical providers know everything that's happening with you after a collision.
And when it comes to like documenting these trips to, I guess, medical facilities, can you tell us a little bit more about like what needs to be documented? Yeah,
well, I mean, part of that is going to be dependent on what you're actually going through. Like, you don't want to lie, if your knee doesn't hurt, then you don't need to tell your doctors that your knee hurts, right? But you just want to be really comprehensive with everything. And, because again, it's important. You might not even know the severity of something. And if you don't tell your medical provider what's going on completely with you, then they're going to be unable to evaluate you, which is just dangerous because something underlying could be going on that you might not think is a big deal, but you might have lacerated a kidney, right? And you might say, well, my back kind of hurts, but you might actually be internally bleeding. So first of all, it's important to document it with your medical providers because you need to get the help that you need. But it's also really important for your case because, ultimately, Insurance adjusters are only going to give you credit for what's documented in the medical records. Again, jurors don't work that way. If you're a believable, honest person, you're going to get credit from a jury from what you testify about. But it's just so much easier to back up your testimony with, look what I said the day after to my family physician who I've been going to for 20 years. I said I had low back pain. That's still what I'm suffering with today. It makes it a lot easier to prove and to get a jury to understand that that's what happened as a result of the wreck itself.
Absolutely. So we've covered the evidence the client gathers themselves, photos, witnesses, video, and medical records. So now let's talk about the heavyweight evidence, the experts, the reconstruction, and the technical analysis that separates strong cases from cases that settle for nothing in Chatham County. So expert witnesses are not people who saw the accident. They are professionals brought in to analyze the evidence and explain it to a Chatham County jury. How do lawyers use expert witnesses to strengthen car accident compensation cases in Georgia?
Well, the first thing is if you hire an inexperienced lawyer, they may not be properly evaluating who the right experts are. And it's not even just who the right experts are, it's how are they going to appear in front of a jury? Do they have baggage in their history that the other side's going to be able to use against them? If you're not fully evaluating your experts, you're not doing due diligence to your client and their claims. But experts are so incredibly important, and having good ones that you can trust as an attorney are just sometimes it's the only way you're going to have a shot at winning a case. But there are experts who do everything from analyzing the scene of a crash and what we call accident reconstructionists. There's a science behind this where they go in and they look at skid marks. Hopefully you've documented some pictures of that. They look at the timing and sequencing of the lights. They evaluate witness statements. They look at the crash damage, and they're able to use all of that and go through the scientific process to evaluate exactly how the crash happened. That's really important for proving that the other side did something wrong. Sometimes that's really important for other things, like how bad could something like this have injured you? If the other side is saying, well, this property damage doesn't look that bad on the car, a good biomechanical engineer might be able to come in and say, here's how this works in somebody like this's body when this type of force hits you. And they can explain why you're experiencing the pain and suffering or the injuries that you've suffered. And then the third thing that's really important, and I think this gets a little bit overlooked by many attorneys, is, whether it's a treating provider or you have to go hire another expert to evaluate sort of the causation, which is, did the wreck cause the things that you're complaining of? And so having a really good neurosurgeon or orthopedic surgeon, or perhaps a neurologist if it's a brain injury case, it's really important to have really good experts who aren't just going to say what you want them to say, but that are qualified and who are able to support the claims that you're bringing on behalf of your client.
Would you say that, what's the cost versus value analysis when it comes to using an expert in these cases?
Yeah, they get really expensive. And most people don't know this, by the way. So I work on contingency fee agreements, which means that clients only pay me once there's been a recovery, and they only pay out of the recovery. They're never paying anything out of pocket. The same is true for the expenses to an extent as well. I cover all the expenses on the front end, so my clients aren't having to risk and have the burden of putting up these expenses, and then those are reimbursed on the back end. But they get very expensive. I've had cases that have $500,000-$600,000 in expenses before you go to trial, right? They're really expensive. Not every case costs that much, especially car wreck cases. Usually you can do those for much cheaper, $20,000, $25,000, and sometimes even less than that. You don't want an attorney who's going to try to get a discount, though, when you need the proper expert. But you also want somebody who's being conscientious to know that, at the end of the day, this is going to come out of the recovery. And so you don't want to overspend either. You want to choose the sort of the right balance of, this is the right expert that I need for this case, but don't want to go overboard with it.
Yeah, because ultimately that expert could be the reason why, your case does well.
Yeah.
So reconstruction is the gold standard of crash analysis, especially for serious crashes on the Port of Savannah truck corridors and the major interstates. How does accident reconstruction help prove what really happened on roads like I-16, I-95, or Truman Parkway?
Yeah, so again, these accident reconstructionists are actually going through the scientific process to be able to say with some level of confidence what actually happened, right? Sometimes it's a he said, she said, or sometimes maybe everybody got in a bad wreck and nobody remembers because maybe somebody unfortunately passed, or maybe somebody had a brain injury. So sometimes it's not even that somebody's lying. It's just that nobody actually, was able to remember what happened in a way. And so accident reconstructionists, they're really important for car wreck cases because they say this is how it happened based on the actual forensic evidence in the case. They're able, again, to measure skid marks. They're able to look at the sort of the force of the property damage to the vehicles on the scene. They might go out to the scene and see that a tree's fallen down, and that's pretty good evidence that something with a lot of force hit that tree. So they're really important in car wreck cases. They're also really important when you have either a road defect claim, which is if there was some issue with the road that led to the wreck. They're really important for showing that, whether it was a hydroplane incident or maybe there was a pothole in the road that caused you to go off the road. Also, accident reconstructionists are really important for product liability cases as well. So if your tire blew out, having an accident reconstructionist to show how the tire blew out and what the effect of that was, where your vehicle went, if you could stop your vehicle in any way, they're super important for a number of different types of cases. We use accident reconstructionists on almost every case.
Wow. So the damage on the vehicle tells its own story, especially when a tractor trailer is involved. How can vehicle damage reports help determine who caused the accident?
Okay. So with whether it's a tractor trailer case or just, a normal type of car wreck case, the actual damage to the vehicles is super important because you're actually able to measure based on the damage, how fast you or the other driver was going. You might be even able to tell, from the angle at which the damage is, where one car was coming from and where another was going. That's really important when there's a dispute as to liability. It's also really important when you say, and a doctor says you have a herniated disc or you have some other back injury. The weight and the force of the wreck itself sometimes is vital evidence for proving that this type of wreck can cause this type of injury. And so evaluating all of those factors is super important for every single case.
Yeah. So when the officer issues a citation at the scene, that citation becomes a part of the evidence file. Do traffic violations documented at the scene strengthen a compensation claim in Georgia?
Well, again, it depends what they say. And again, not everything in a traffic report is going to be admissible at trial. Some things might be. Other things might not be. Where it's really important, again, is on the front end in a claim of the claim with an insurance adjuster. They're going to be heavily relying on what that crash report says. So yeah, they're definitely important, but they're not the end all be all. And by the way, if it's not good for you, but you believe that the events were different than what is said there, you have to get an experienced trial attorney who knows how to unpack that evidence, who knows how to investigate the claim, and knows how to get the right experts in place to help bolster your claims.
So medical evidence proves injuries happened, and it also proves what those injuries cost. So what role do medical bills and treatment records play in determining compensation amounts?
So my answer would have been different just about a year ago. Unfortunately, the insurance industry and large corporate interests have basically bought off the Georgia legislature to pass legislation that is hurtful to Georgians and only helpful to those insurance companies and large corporations. What do I mean by that? Well, in the past, if you'd been paying, let's say you've been paying for health insurance for 20 years, but you never used it for a car wreck, and then one day you're smashed by somebody, your life is potentially forever changed, and all of a sudden you've got $150,000, $200,000 in medical bills. Fortunately, if you have health insurance, the health insurance is going to pay much less. If it's $200,000, they might pay $100,000. And in the past, what you could introduce at trial was the $200,000 bill, but the defense was not allowed to then say, well, you had a health insurance company pay for it. After SB 68, what they call tort reform passed, the insurance lobbyist got passed in Georgia, the rules have changed. So if you're a prudent person and you've been paying your health insurance premiums for 20 years, doesn't matter. You don't get credit for that. Even though that's the reason why you were able to get a reduction in that bill, is because you've been paying on those for 20 years. The defense now gets to come in and say, well, even though your bill says $200,000, the insurance company paid for the whole thing and they only paid $100,000. And their goal is to have a jury say, well, we now don't think your case is worth as much as it used to be. Here's the thing, though. Medical bills can be really important. I think a good lawyer gets away from that. I think it's a crutch that some lawyers rely too heavily on to say, I really want to base my client's claims on these medical bills. I think a good lawyer talks about the story. What happened to this person and their family and what they used to do and what they used to love. And so I think we have to be even better attorneys here in the state of Georgia post-tort reform. And we have to at times say, we're not even going to introduce the medical bills because this case, you know what? It's not about the medical bills. Sure, that's a burden that some folks have to bear, but this is about the loss of life. This is about pain and suffering. This is about not being able to hold your grandkid or not being able to go to the beach with your son because you were in a serious collision. And so I think that's what the real challenge for us as lawyers is yes, medical bills can be important, and there are times where it's important to introduce them as evidence, but I think we've got to challenge ourselves to get outside of that safety crutch and really try the case for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, when it's personal, it hurts a lot more. So I think that's a really important note. We have covered the full evidence toolkit: police reports, photos, witnesses, video, medical records, expert witnesses, accident reconstruction, vehicle damage, and traffic citations. Now let's talk about how it all comes together here in Savannah. So how lawyers stack the pieces, how insurers fight back, and what makes the difference between settling fast and going to trial at the Chatham County Superior Court.
And I think all of that is true. And I think, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, right? But that's why you need an experienced attorney to be able to help you through all of those things. Because if you're only focused on one aspect of things, you're missing the boat, because the insurance company ultimately is going to hire an experienced defense attorney who isn't just focused on one aspect. And if they are, that's because they've found a weakness that they feel like they can really pursue to weaken your claims. But having an experienced lawyer to go through all of that and to be able to process different things simultaneously about your case, not just focus on the liability, not just focus on causation, not just focus on the injuries, but to look at them all holistically and fight back for your interests. I think it's incredibly important to find somebody who can actually advocate you in that way.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. So building a car accident case is not about one perfect piece of evidence. It's about layering until the picture is undeniable. How do lawyers combine multiple types of evidence to build a strong accident lawsuit?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's putting together all this evidence in a way that you can present that's compelling to a jury. I think lawyers can make two really big mistakes. One is they don't put up all the evidence that's compelling that, might convince a jury one way or the other. But the other mistake that attorneys make is on the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's going too far, too deep, and not being concise. Jurors have families. By and large, they do not want to be in the courtroom listening to your lawyer arguments and listening to, all the evidence. It is a civic duty, and most of them take it very seriously. But you need to be a very good steward of their time, and you need to present this evidence. Yes, all of it comprehensively, but concisely. You need to move quickly. And I always tell jurors that at the beginning of the case. Listen, I'm going to show you the evidence, but I'm going to do it very quickly because I appreciate that you guys have families and lives you want to get back to. And I think oftentimes jurors appreciate that. I've had jurors come up to me and tell me after trials that, they felt like I was there to advocate for my client but not waste their time, whereas the defense was there to completely waste their time. And they get mad when you waste their time. So you definitely don't want to make the mistake of going overboard either.
Yeah, that's really good advice. What happens when the report is weak, incomplete, or just flat out wrong? Can a Savannah police report be overcome with stronger independent evidence?
Definitely. It happens all the time. You'd be surprised how often, again, police officers, they just want to do their job and go home to their families. Sometimes that means they don't do a very thorough investigation. Sometimes maybe they do a thorough investigation, but they weren't considering some piece of evidence that you might have that they didn't have at the time. And so it happens all the time. Police officers, again, they're human. But when you have the right attorney who's able to investigate and look at these things from a holistic perspective, and when you have the experts who are able to really spend the time to analyze the situation, I would say, more often than not, you can overcome a bad police report.
What kind of things would be considered stronger independent evidence? Like, are you saying like photo documentation, video evidence? Like, what kinds of things would a person like need to know if they wanted to present stronger evidence of their own if a police report wasn't accurate?
So a couple of things. Like I mentioned the one story earlier, sometimes the police might not have interviewed the witness, right? And they might put something in their report that's inaccurate because they didn't talk to the unbiased witness who saw the scene. Sometimes they might have just missed something at the scene. Again, things like skid marks in the roadway are super important for understanding how something happened. If the other driver says that, they never saw a vehicle, but then there's skid marks going 15 feet back from where their car was coming from, well, then they obviously did see the driver and attempted to make some sort of maneuver. So again, going back to the scene, having experts go to the scene to pick up on things that the police may have just missed is super important, and it happens every single day.
Mm-hmm. So the insurance company is not going to look at your evidence and just agree. We all know that. How do insurance companies challenge evidence presented by car accident victims here in Savannah?
Again, every insurance adjuster is not created equal. There are some that I've found in my career that are very professional, very experienced, and usually those are the ones that are able to reason and accept different points and accept criticism of their own investigation. You also have insurance adjusters that are very inexperienced, and usually when we're inexperienced in things, what we do is we kind of just say what we don't know. So sometimes it's just the luck of which insurance adjuster you get, but they will oftentimes they rely heavily on the police report. Depends on how bad of a wreck it is. If it's a catastrophic injury, especially if it's a tractor trailer crash, I guarantee you that insurance adjuster's already had an attorney out to the scene before you even call an attorney. For any big tractor trailer company around the country, they have lawyers on speed dial that'll come out in the middle of the night. They'll wake them up sitting in their beds with their families to go out and investigate a crash scene. And so they absolutely oftentimes have a system in place for trying to start to poke holes in your case before you even know you really have a case or before you've even hired an attorney. So it's really important, even in that adrenaline rush, and even if you're like, I don't know if litigation's for me, at least talk to an attorney early on so they can advise you as to if there are things you need to be doing to preserve your claim.
Would insurance companies look back into any pre-existing medical conditions that you might have, or maybe even just things that have gone on within your life that they could allege are relatable to the case?
100%. Them and defense attorneys are going to do that. If you sneezed one time 35 years ago, and there's a medical record where you say your back was hurting because of that sneeze, and even though if you didn't have a single complaint for 35 years after that, they're going to point to that and say that's what caused the back injury was the sneeze, not the 10,000 pound tractor trailer that ran into you. So they'll do that. Another thing they'll do is they'll go video you. I've had this happen before, right, where a client wasn't being entirely honest with me about what his injuries were and what he was able to do. And he came in and testified under oath that he was able to do X, Y, and Z. And then at mediation before a trial, the defense attorney was nice enough to show me the video of 3 hours of video of him doing the things he said he could not do. So be very careful. You want to be honest, but you also want to be careful that they probably got some creepy guy in the backwoods behind your house videotaping you from afar to try to get evidence to disprove what you're saying you can do.
Well, that's not sketchy at all. So just be wary of that, guys. So most cases never see a courtroom. When the evidence is overwhelming, the insurance company often settles. Why do some Georgia car accident cases settle quickly when strong evidence is available?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the goal. We understand. I'm a crazy person, right? I love trial. Trial is fun for me. That's what I got in to do this. But I also understand trial isn't fun usually for my clients, having to relive their tragedy. And also it's not often worth it for them to go through that process when they could at times resolve it ahead of time. And so always my goal is to try to resolve cases as quickly as possible for as much as possible. But sometimes, the insurance companies just aren't willing to pay early on. And so it's important in every single case, every case I have, I'm preparing for trial, because the ones that do go to trial, you want a trial attorney who's actually been able to prepare the case in that way, so you're not, left standing without the tools you need for trial. Usually what I find is if you prepare your case for trial, insurance companies and defendants know that, and typically you can get those larger settlements and typically can get them early on because they know you're going to do what you say, you're going to go hire the right experts, you're going to ask the right questions, you're going to investigate the claims, and you're going to be ready to try that case when it comes time.
It's good to know. Some cases have evidence pointing in both directions, and the case heads to trial. When evidence is disputed, how does that affect the likelihood of going to trial?
Well, when it's disputed, the more disputes you have, the more likely you are to go to trial. Right? If you only have a dispute as to whether, if there's a neck, back, and shoulder pain, and they're only disputing the shoulder pain, that case is probably going to settle. But if it's a case where they're disputing all of the injuries, they're disputing the causation, they're disputing whether they even were the ones who ran the red light or did the bad thing, then those are the examples that you might actually go to trial, because they know from a risk analysis evaluation, the more doubt they can put in the jury's minds, the less likely it is that you're going to be successful or you're going to recover what you want to recover at the end of the day. So oftentimes the ones that do go to trial are the hardest cases, because there is a lot in dispute and there's just a lot of disagreement as to what a jury is going to decide at the end of the day.
Okay, Andy, last question before we wrap everything up. Out of all of it, some evidence carries more weight than the rest. What are the most powerful pieces of evidence that tend to win Georgia car accident lawsuits?
I would say the absolute most important thing, you could have the best or the worst attorney in the world, but what jurors care about more is the best or the worst plaintiffs in the world. And so if you're credible and you've been telling the truth and you've actually been through a tragedy, jurors understand that. They're going to pick up on that. And if they like the plaintiff by far and away more than any other piece of evidence, that's what they're going to use to decide that you get to be successful in a case. If they don't like you, or if you maybe fudge the truth a little bit and they feel like you're not being honest with them, I don't care if you've got a camera footage of you getting smashed by a tractor trailer and the number one surgeon in the world saying that it caused you to have a surgery. If they don't like you, they're going to find a way to either say that you don't win at all, or they're going to significantly reduce what they're going to compensate you with. So the absolute number one most important thing is you as the client.
That's a good note. On top of that, yes, you have to be likable and you have to tell the truth, but things like, video footage and making sure that the police report is important. Would you say that those hold a heavy weight as well?
Yeah, it's everything matters, right? Like if you're a really likable plaintiff, but you've got all the other rest of the evidence is against you, then it's still going to be a tough hill to climb. So I'd still say that the likability of the plaintiff is the most important factor, but that doesn't mean you don't want to be doing everything you can to develop the evidence on all other aspects of the case. And that's, again, where a seasoned trial attorney comes into play and why you really need to hire somebody with experience trying cases.
So, Andy, this has been really valuable. We've gotten deep on every type of evidence that matters in car accident cases here in Savannah. The police report, photographs, witnesses, video footage, medical records, expert witnesses, accident reconstruction, vehicle damage, traffic citations, and how it all comes together in Chatham County courtroom. For someone who's watching this, who has been in a car accident in Savannah and is trying to sort of figure out whether they have a strong case, what is one thing that you want them to remember about evidence?
One thing I want them to remember about evidence is they're going to be their best experts because they're usually the only ones with the opportunities to collect that evidence at certain points in time. Obviously, the most obvious is at the scene of the accident. Most people don't have a lawyer on speed dial to come out there and investigate. So taking those pictures, taking those videos, gathering witness statements, doing all that you possibly can, if you're in a condition to be able to do so, is super important. But the flip side of that is also just taking care of yourself and going to your medical appointments, because you want to do that for your own health and well-being, but you also want to do that because that's going to be really important for corroborating in court what you say you're experiencing in terms of injuries and pain and suffering and those sorts of things.
So if you have been in a car accident in Savannah and you're not sure whether your evidence is strong enough to pursue a claim, make that call. You can find Conn Law Firm at andyconn.attorney or call them directly at 912-373-8642. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next episode of Savannah Car and Truck Accident Law with Andy Conn.